The day Rebecca Hart traded her wedding ring for a 10-pound sack of flour. The sky hung gray and heavy over Guthrie, Oklahoma territory, like a shroud draped across the prairie. It was September 1893, and the economic panic that had gripped the nation since May had finally reached its long fingers into this dusty settlement that had sprung up just 4 years earlier during the land run. Rebecca stood in Callahan's general store, her hands trembling as she slid the simple gold band across the scarred wooden counter, trying not to meet the sympathetic eyes of Mr. Callahan, who had known her husband Thomas before consumption had stolen him away 6 months prior. "I am sorry, Mrs. Hart," Mr. Callahan said, his voice soft with genuine regret as he examined the ring. "Times being what they are, I can only offer you this flour and perhaps some beans." Rebecca swallowed hard, her throat tight with unshed tears. At 23 years old, she had already buried a husband and was now trying to keep herself and her 7-year-old daughter Emma alive in a homestead cabin, 5 miles outside town. The small vegetable garden she had managed to coax from the Oklahoma soil had yielded enough to get them through summer. But autumn was approaching fast, and she needed flour to make bread, needed beans to fill their bellies when the cold winds came howling across the plains. "The flour will be sufficient," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She could not bear to take more than absolutely necessary, though pride was a luxury she could scarcely afford anymore. Mr. Callahan nodded solemnly and fetched the flour from the back room. As he placed it in her worn canvas bag, he picked up the ring again, turning it in the afternoon light that filtered through the dusty shop windows. The inscription inside was simple: Thomas and Rebecca, April 1888. 5 years they had been married, 5 years of struggle and hope and love that ended with her holding his hand as he took his last labored breath. "I will keep it here in case," Mr. Callahan said, placing the ring in a small wooden box beneath the counter. "If circumstances change." Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She knew circumstances would not change. The only money coming in was from the occasional washing and mending she did for the few families in the area who could still afford to pay. And that was barely enough to keep them in firewood, and the few staples she could not grow or make herself. She was halfway out the door when she nearly collided with a man coming in. He caught her elbow to steady her, and she found herself looking up into eyes the color of the sky just before a storm, gray-blue and intense. "Beg your pardon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the weathered face of someone who spent his days under the sun. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but his boots were good quality, and the gun at his hip was well maintained. A cowboy, she thought, or perhaps a ranch hand passing through. "No harm done," Rebecca managed, stepping around him and hurrying down the wooden sidewalk toward where she had left her wagon hitched. Emma was waiting there, her small face pressed against the wagon side, watching a group of children playing with a hoop across the street. "Did you get the flour, Mama?" Emma asked, her blue eyes bright with hope. "I did, sweetheart," Rebecca said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice as she climbed onto the wagon seat and helped Emma up beside her. "We will make biscuits tonight." Emma clapped her hands together, and the simple joy on her daughter's face made the ache in Rebecca's chest both better and worse. She had sold her wedding ring, the last piece of her old life, but she had bought them a few more weeks of survival. That was what Thomas would have wanted. He would have wanted her to keep fighting, to keep their daughter safe and fed and alive. The ride back to the homestead was quiet except for the creak of the wagon wheels and Emma's occasional chatter about the things she saw along the trail. Rebecca let the words wash over her, responding when necessary but mostly lost in her own thoughts. The land stretched out around them, golden grass waving in the breeze, the sky vast and indifferent above. Oklahoma Territory was beautiful in its own harsh way, but it was unforgiving to those without resources. Inside the general store, the man who had nearly collided with Rebecca approached the counter. Preston Parker was 30 years old, trail-worn but not trail-weary. A man who had spent the last 12 years working cattle drives and ranch work across Texas, Kansas, and now Oklahoma Territory. He had just signed on as foreman at the Double R Ranch, 10 miles west of Guthrie, and had come into town to pick up supplies and get a sense of the community. "Afternoon," Mr. Callahan said, setting aside the ledger he had been studying. "What can I do for you?" "Need to pick up an order for the Double R," Preston said, handing over a list. "Mr. Richardson sent me in." "Ah, you are the new foreman he hired," Mr. Callahan said, recognition dawning on his face. "Heard you come with good references from down Texas way." "I do my best," Preston said with a slight smile. As Mr. Callahan began gathering the items on the list, Preston's gaze fell on the small wooden box the shopkeeper had left on the counter. The lid was not quite closed and a glint of gold caught his eye. "That is a wedding ring," he observed. Mr. Callahan followed his gaze and sighed. "It is. Just took it in trade not 5 minutes ago. Young widow, desperate times. She has a little girl to feed and the panic has hit everyone hard. I could not turn her away with nothing." Preston felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen hard times before, had lived through them himself after his parents died of cholera when he was 15, leaving him to make his own way in the world. "The woman who just left, the one I nearly knocked over, Mrs. Rebecca Hart. Her husband Thomas died of consumption back in the spring. She has been trying to make it on her own ever since, but it is not easy for a woman alone out here." Mr. Callahan shook his head. "She is a proud one too. Would not take more than just the flour, though Lord knows she could use beans and coffee and a dozen other things." Preston was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman's face, the exhaustion and determination he had seen in her eyes, the way she had held that canvas bag like it contained gold instead of flour. "How much would it cost to buy that ring from you?" Mr. Callahan looked up sharply. "You are not thinking of proposing to someone already, are you? You just got to town." "No," Preston said, pulling out his wallet. "I am thinking of buying it and giving it back to her." The shopkeeper blinked in surprise. "That is uncommonly generous of you, Mr. Parker." "Maybe," Preston said. "Or maybe I just know what it is like to have nothing." "How much?" Mr. Callahan named a price, modest but fair, and Preston counted out the bills without hesitation. He had been saving his wages for years, living rough and spending little. He could afford this small kindness. "Where does she live?" "About 5 miles northeast of town, out past Cottonwood Creek. Little cabin with a red door. You cannot miss it." Mr. Callahan wrapped the ring carefully in a piece of cloth and handed it to Preston. "You are a good man, Mr. Parker. Not many would do such a thing." Preston pocketed the ring and helped load the ranch supplies into his wagon. But his mind was not on flour sacks and coffee tins. It was on a woman with sad eyes and a daughter who watched other children play, on the kind of desperation that would make someone trade away their most precious possession just to survive another few weeks. He told himself he would ride out tomorrow after he finished his duties at the ranch. It was the decent thing to do, nothing more. But that night, lying in his bunk in the ranch foreman's quarters, he could not stop thinking about Rebecca Hart. There had been something in her face, a strength beneath the sorrow that called to something deep inside him. The next day was consumed with work. Preston spent his time learning the layout of the Double R, meeting the ranch hands, and taking stock of the cattle. Mr. Richardson, the ranch owner, was a gruff but fair man in his 60s who had built his spread up from nothing and expected hard work from everyone in his employ. Preston was determined to prove himself worth the faith Mr. Richardson had placed in him by offering the foreman position. It was not until late afternoon 2 days later that Preston finally found time to make the ride into Guthrie and then out to the Hart homestead. He had told himself he would just leave the ring and go, maybe not even see her if she was busy. But as he approached the cabin with its red door, he saw Rebecca in the small garden plot beside the house, her dress sleeves rolled up, a hoe in her hands as she worked to clear away the spent summer plants. She straightened as she heard his horse approach, one hand going to shade her eyes against the afternoon sun. Preston could see the wariness in her posture, the caution of a woman alone who had learned to be careful around strangers. "Afternoon, madam," he called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. "I do not know if you remember me. We nearly collided at Callahan's General Store a few days back." Recognition flickered across her face. "I remember. What brings you out this way, Mr. Parker?" "Preston Parker. I am the new foreman at the Double R Ranch." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. "I came to bring you something." Rebecca's brow furrowed in confusion. "I cannot imagine what that might be." Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out the cloth-wrapped ring. He walked forward slowly and held it out to her. "This." She stared at the bundle for a long moment before reaching out with a dirt-stained hand to take it. When she unfolded the cloth and saw the gold band, all the color drained from her face. "How did you? Why would you?" "I bought it from Mr. Callahan," Preston said simply. "Seemed wrong for you to have to give it up just to feed your family. Figured you might want it back." Rebecca's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the ring. "I cannot accept this. I do not know you. I cannot take charity from a stranger." "It is not charity," Preston said, though he knew it was not entirely true. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. Pay me back when times improve." "And if they do not improve?" Rebecca asked, her voice breaking slightly. "I have no way to repay you. I can barely keep food on the table as it is." Preston had not thought this through as well as he should have. He had just known he wanted to return the ring to her, wanted to ease that desperate look he had seen in her eyes at the general store. "Then you do not pay me back. It is just a small amount of money, Mrs. Hart. It will not break me to lose it." "But it is not a small thing to me," she whispered, staring down at the ring. "This was my husband's ring to me. It is all I have left of him besides our daughter." Behind her, the cabin door opened and Emma appeared, her small face curious. "Mama, who is that man?" Rebecca quickly wiped her eyes and turned to her daughter. "This is Mr. Parker, Emma. He has just brought something to Mama." Emma stepped out onto the small porch, studying Preston with the frank, assessing gaze of childhood. "Are you a cowboy?" "I am," Preston said, grateful for the interruption. "I work with cattle at the Double R Ranch. My papa used to tell me stories about cowboys," Emma said, coming down the steps. "Before he got sick." Preston felt that tightness in his chest again. "Your papa sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Mama says he is in heaven now, watching over us." Rebecca had slipped the ring back onto her finger and Preston saw her touch it gently, as if confirming it was real. When she looked up at him, there were tears in her eyes but also something else, something that might have been the beginning of trust. "Thank you, Mr. Parker," she said softly. "You have given me back something I thought was lost forever. I do not know how to repay such kindness." "You do not need to repay it," Preston said. He should leave now, should tip his hat and ride back to the ranch and let that be the end of it. But he found himself asking, "Is there anything else you need?" "Repairs around the place, maybe. I am handy with tools." Rebecca glanced back at the cabin and Preston followed her gaze. Even from here, he could see the porch sagging slightly on one side, a shutter hanging crooked, the barn door that did not quite close properly. "I could not ask you to do more." "You are not asking. I am offering." Preston surprised himself with his own insistence. "I have tomorrow afternoon free. I could ride out and fix that porch at least. Looks like it might give way come winter." For a long moment, Rebecca just looked at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "If you truly do not mind, I would be grateful. I have been worried about that porch, but I do not have the skills to fix it properly myself." "It is settled then," Preston said, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. "I will come by tomorrow after the noon meal." As he rode back to the Double R, Preston tried to tell himself he was just being neighborly, just doing what any decent person would do. But he could not shake the memory of Rebecca's face when she had unwrapped that ring. The way her eyes had filled with tears, the strength and vulnerability he saw warring within her. He had known her all of perhaps 15 minutes across 2 brief meetings, but something about Rebecca Hart had gotten under his skin. True to his word, Preston arrived at the homestead the next afternoon with tools and lumber he had purchased in town. Rebecca met him with a shy smile and a glass of cool water from her well, and Emma danced around asking 100 questions about ranch life and horses and cattle. "Emma, let Mr. Parker work," Rebecca chided gently, but Preston waved off her concern. "She is fine. I do not mind the company." And he did not. Emma's cheerful chatter kept the silence from growing awkward as he worked, and it gave him an excuse to glance over at Rebecca, who was hanging washing on a line strung between 2 posts. The porch repair took longer than expected because once Preston started looking, he found more problems that needed addressing. A support beam was rotting through, several boards were cracked, and the whole structure needed reinforcing. He worked steadily through the afternoon, aware of Rebecca watching him occasionally from wherever she was working. When Emma asked if she could help, Preston found her small tasks to do, handing him nails, holding boards steady. The girl reminded him of his younger sister, who had died with their parents. Mary had been 8 years old, full of life and questions, and there were still days when Preston missed her with an ache that never fully went away. "You are good with her," Rebecca said when Emma had run inside to fetch something. "Do you have children of your own?" "No, madam. Never been married." Preston hammered in another nail, trying to keep his tone casual. "Had a younger sister once, though. She passed when I was 15. Emma reminds me of her a bit." "I am sorry for your loss," Rebecca said softly. "It is a terrible thing to lose family." "It was a long time ago," Preston said, though they both knew that did not make it hurt less. "Your husband, if you do not mind my asking, how long has it been?" 6 months. Rebecca's hand went unconsciously to the ring on her finger. He fought the consumption for nearly a year before it took him. By the end, he could barely breathe. It was a mercy when he finally passed, though I feel guilty for thinking such a thing. "It is not wrong to want someone's suffering to end," Preston said. "That is love, not cruelty." Rebecca looked at him with surprise, as if she had not expected such understanding. "That is what the preacher said, but I was not sure I believed it until now." Emma came bursting back out with a handful of wildflowers she had picked. "Mama, can we give some to Mr. Parker? For being so nice." Preston felt his ears grow warm. "That is very kind of you, Miss Emma, but your mama might want them for the table." "We have plenty," Rebecca said, a genuine smile crossing her face for the first time since he had met her. Emma has a gift for finding flowers where no one else can see them. By the time the sun was sinking toward the horizon, the porch was solid and safe, and Preston had also managed to fix the barn door and rehang the crooked shutter. Rebecca insisted he stay for supper as payment, and though he protested, he found himself sitting at their small table, eating simple stew and cornbread that tasted better than any meal he could remember. Emma kept the conversation flowing with her endless questions and observations, but Preston found himself watching Rebecca, noticing the way candlelight softened her features, the grace in her movements despite her work-worn hands, the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at her daughter. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the delicate way of the saloon girls or the society women he sometimes saw in town, but in a deeper way that came from strength and survival. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged his leg and made him promise to visit again. Rebecca walked him out to his horse, the Oklahoma night settling around them with its chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. "Thank you, Mr. Parker," she said, and there was something different in her voice now, a warmth that had not been there before. "You have done more for us in one day than I could have hoped for, Preston," he said. "If I am going to keep coming around, you might as well call me Preston. Only if you call me Rebecca." She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger, less burdened. "Will you come again?" "Emma would love to hear more about ranch life, and I confess I enjoy the company. It gets lonely out here sometimes." "I would like that," Preston said, and meant it more than he probably should have. "I will come by when I can. Maybe this Sunday after church if you attend." "We do," Rebecca said. "The little church in town. We would be glad to see you there." As Preston rode back to the ranch that night, he felt something shifting inside him, like a door he had kept locked for years was beginning to open. He had been alone for so long, focused only on work and survival, never letting himself think about things like family or home or love. But something about Rebecca and Emma had awakened a longing he had not known he possessed. The following Sunday, Preston cleaned up as best he could and rode into Guthrie in time for the church service. He spotted Rebecca and Emma in one of the middle pews, and when Rebecca saw him, her face lit up with pleasure. She made room for him beside them, and Preston found himself sitting through the sermon acutely aware of her presence, the way her shoulder occasionally brushed his, the soft sound of her voice as she sang the hymns. After the service, several townspeople approached to introduce themselves to the new ranch foreman. Preston was polite but distracted, wanting only to talk to Rebecca. When they finally had a moment alone while Emma played with other children in the churchyard, he found himself tongue-tied, unsure what to say. "It is a beautiful day," Rebecca said, rescuing him from his awkwardness. "Too beautiful to spend entirely indoors. Would you like to walk with us? There is a nice path along the creek." "I would like that very much," Preston said. They walked together in the autumn sunshine, Emma running ahead to chase butterflies while Preston and Rebecca talked. She told him about her life before Oklahoma, how she and Thomas had met in Missouri and decided to try their luck in the land run of 1889. They had claimed their plot and built their cabin with dreams of creating a prosperous farm. But the land had been harder than they expected, and then Thomas had gotten sick, and all their dreams had slowly crumbled. "I thought about leaving," Rebecca admitted as they paused beside the creek, watching the water flow past. "Going back to Missouri to live with my sister. But this is the land Thomas died for. Our home is here such as it is. I cannot just abandon that." "That is not foolish," Preston said. "It is brave. Not many people would have the strength to keep fighting the way you have." Rebecca turned to look at him, really look at him, and Preston felt something pass between them, an acknowledgement of mutual understanding, of shared loneliness and hard-won survival. "You know about fighting, do not you? About being alone?" "I have been on my own since I was 15, Preston said. Worked ranches from Texas to Montana and everywhere in between. Never stayed anywhere long, never let myself get attached to places or people. It seemed easier that way. And now? Rebecca asked softly. Preston met her eyes, those deep brown eyes that held both sorrow and hope. Now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe the hard way and the easy way are not always the same thing. They were interrupted by Emma calling for her mother, having found a particularly interesting rock that required immediate adult appreciation. But as they walked back toward town, Preston felt Rebecca's hand brush against his, and this time he was almost certain it was not an accident. Over the following weeks, Preston found himself riding out to the Hart homestead whenever he could spare the time. He told himself he was just helping out, fixing things around the property that needed a man's hand, chopping wood for the winter that was coming, checking the roof for leaks. But the truth was he just wanted to be near Rebecca, wanted to hear her voice and see her smile, wanted to watch the way she moved through her daily tasks with quiet competence. Rebecca seemed to welcome his presence, and gradually, the walls between them began to come down. She talked about Thomas without as much pain, sharing memories of the good times, the dreams they had shared. Preston talked about his own past, about losing his family and the lonely years that followed. They discovered they both loved watching the stars, both found peace in the wide Oklahoma sky, both understood what it meant to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Emma adored Preston, following him around when he worked, asking endless questions, begging for rides on his horse. He was patient with her in a way that made Rebecca's heart ache with a confusing mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she was not quite ready to name. One October evening, after a day spent helping Rebecca harvest the last of her garden vegetables, Preston stayed for supper, as had become his habit. Emma was nodding off over her plate, exhausted from playing, and Rebecca carried her to bed while Preston cleaned up the dishes, another routine they had fallen into without discussing it. When Rebecca returned, she found Preston standing by the window, looking out at the prairie sunset. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "She asked me today if you were going to be her new papa," Rebecca said quietly. Preston's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you are our good friend and that we are very lucky to have you in our lives." Rebecca turned to face him. "But Preston, I need to know what this is, what you want from us. I cannot let Emma get too attached if you are just going to leave eventually." Preston turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am not going anywhere, Rebecca. I know it has only been a couple months. I know it is too soon to feel what I feel, but I cannot help it. When I am here with you and Emma, I feel like I have finally found something I did not even know I was looking for." "And what is that?" Rebecca whispered, though she thought she knew. "Home," Preston said simply. "Family. A reason to stay in one place instead of always running." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. "I am falling in love with you, Rebecca. Maybe I have been since the moment I bought that ring back for you. I know you might not feel the same way. I know you might still be grieving Thomas. But I needed you to know the truth." Rebecca closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She had known, on some level, what was growing between them. Had felt it in the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding toward the cabin, the way his smile could brighten even her darkest days, the way she had started to think of him as part of her life, instead of just a visitor passing through. "I do still grieve Thomas," she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I think I always will, in a way. He was my husband, the father of my child, but he would not have wanted me to stop living. He made me promise before he died that I would find happiness again if I could. I did not think I would. I did not think I wanted to. But then you came along with your kindness and your gentle ways, and you made me feel things I thought I would never feel again." "Rebecca," Preston breathed. And then he was kissing her, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, letting herself feel for the first time in so long the warmth of being wanted, being cherished. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. Want to do this right. I know people will talk, might say it is too soon after Thomas, but I do not care what they say as long as you do not." "I do not care," Rebecca said. "Life is too short and too hard to waste time worrying about what people think. If you want to court me, Preston Parker, then I accept." His smile was brighter than the sunset, and he kissed her again, deeper this time, both of them pouring into it all the loneliness and longing of their separate pasts, all the hope and promise of a possible future together. From that night on, Preston's visits became even more frequent. He would ride out after work, spend the evening with Rebecca and Emma, then reluctantly head back to the ranch before it got too late. On Sundays, they attended church together as a family, and if people whispered about the widow Hart and the new ranch foreman, neither of them paid it any mind. Winter arrived with its cutting winds and occasional snow, and Preston worried constantly about Rebecca and Emma alone in their cabin. He brought them extra firewood, supplies he bought with his own money but claimed were excess from the ranch. He taught Emma to play simple card games and told her stories about his adventures on cattle drives. He helped Rebecca preserve food for the winter and made sure the cabin was sealed tight against the cold. And slowly, carefully, his relationship with Rebecca deepened. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared dreams and diverging opinions, learning each other's habits and preferences. He told her about his fear that he was too old, too set in his ways to be a good husband or father. She confessed her worry that she could never love anyone the way she had loved Thomas, that it was unfair to ask Preston to accept only part of her heart. "Love is not a finite resource," Preston said as they sat together on the porch one December evening, bundled in blankets against the cold, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You loving Thomas does not mean you have less love to give me. It just means you have a bigger heart than most." "You are a wise man, Preston Parker," Rebecca said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I have my moments," he said with a smile, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Christmas came, and Preston gave Emma a carved wooden horse he had spent weeks making in secret. The little girl's joy brought tears to both adults' eyes. Rebecca gave him a shirt she had sewn, the stitches careful and even, and when he put it on, she told him he looked handsome enough to break hearts. "There is only one heart I am interested in," he said, pulling her close, and kissed her in front of the Christmas tree they had decorated together with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Emma had made. In January of 1894, on a day when the Oklahoma sky was clear and blue, and the winter sun sparkled on the frost-covered grass, Preston Parker asked Rebecca Hart to marry him. He did it simply, without fancy words or elaborate plans, just the two of them on the porch he had repaired months ago, Emma playing in the yard nearby. "I know I am not Thomas," he said, holding both her hands in his. "I know I can never replace him and I would never try, but I love you, Rebecca. I love Emma. I want to build a life with you, want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me, want to grow old watching that little girl grow up. Will you marry me?" Rebecca was crying, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and relief and love. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, not the gold band from Thomas, but a new one, silver with a small stone that caught the light. "I wanted you to have something that was just ours," he explained as he slid it onto her finger beside the gold band she still wore. "You can wear both if you want. I do not mind sharing your past as long as I get to be your future." Emma came running when she saw them embracing, and when they told her the news, she shrieked with delight and threw her arms around both of them. "I knew it. I told Mama you would be my new papa." They were married in February, in the same small church where they had sat together that first Sunday. Rebecca wore a dress she had remade from her wedding dress to Thomas, altering it carefully to create something that honored the past while embracing the future. Preston wore his best suit, bought new for the occasion, and he could not stop smiling as he watched Rebecca walk toward him down the short aisle. Emma stood with them as Preston's best man and Rebecca's maid of honor, all in one, holding a bouquet of dried flowers since fresh ones were impossible to find in February. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Rebecca with a tenderness that made several of the watching townspeople tear up. After the wedding, Preston moved into the cabin, bringing his few possessions from the ranch. Mr. Richardson had been understanding, even generous, giving Preston a bonus and telling him that if he ever needed work, there would always be a place for him at the Double R. But Preston had saved enough over the years to support his new family while he figured out their next steps. They decided to expand the farm, using Preston's savings to buy a few chickens, a milk cow, and seeds for a larger garden come spring. Preston took on work repairing things for other homesteaders in the area, building a reputation as someone reliable and skilled. Between his odd jobs and Rebecca's washing and mending and Emma's help with chores, they managed to not just survive but slowly begin to thrive. The first year of marriage was an adjustment. Emma took to calling Preston Papa immediately, and watching him with her, seeing the love and patience he showed, made Rebecca fall even deeper in love with her husband. But there were difficult moments too. Times when grief would suddenly overtake her, and she would need to cry for Thomas, for the life they had planned that never came to be. Preston never resented these moments, just held her and let her grieve, understanding that her tears for the past did not diminish her love for the present. There were also the practical challenges of blending their lives, learning each other's rhythms and routines, negotiating decisions that affected them all. Preston had lived alone for so long that he sometimes forgot to communicate his plans, and Rebecca had grown used to making all decisions herself, and occasionally bristled when Preston tried to help. But they worked through each issue with patience and love, learning to compromise, learning to be partners in the truest sense. In the spring of 1895, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified to tell Preston at first, worried about the expense of another mouth to feed, worried about the risks of childbirth. But when she finally confessed her condition, Preston swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy that brought Emma running to see what was wrong. "We are going to have a baby," Preston told Emma, his eyes shining. "You are going to be a big sister." Emma's reaction was pure excitement, and her enthusiasm helped ease Rebecca's fears. Preston was attentive throughout the pregnancy, insisting she rest more, taking over the heavier chores, bringing her little treats from town when he went for supplies. He told her she was beautiful even when she felt ungainly and swollen, and he talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the life they would have together. The baby, a boy they named Peter, was born in November of 1895 during the first snowfall of winter. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from town, and there were moments when Preston paced outside, terrified he might lose Rebecca the way she had lost Thomas. But Rebecca was strong, and when the midwife finally called him in to meet his son, Preston wept as he held the tiny, red-faced infant. "He has your eyes," Rebecca said weakly, exhausted but happy. "He has your strength," Preston replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for letting me be part of this family." Emma was enchanted with her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from changing diapers to singing lullabies. Preston proved to be a natural father, patient with the late-night crying, tender when soothing the baby, tireless in helping Rebecca with all the work a new infant created. As Peter grew from infant to toddler, the little farm continued to prosper. Preston's reputation brought in steady work, and they were able to save a little money, even expand their chicken flock. Rebecca's garden grew larger each year, and she began selling vegetables and preserves in town, bringing in additional income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. In 1897, Rebecca gave birth to their second child together, a daughter they named Patricia. Emma was 9 years old by then and took her role as big sister very seriously, helping Rebecca care for both younger children while Preston worked. The cabin, which had once seemed adequate for just Rebecca and Emma, was now bursting at the seams with a family of 5. "We need more room," Preston said one evening as he and Rebecca sat on the porch after the children were asleep. "I have been thinking about adding on to the cabin, maybe building a second bedroom and expanding the main room." "Can we afford it?" Rebecca asked, though she knew they could. Preston had been squirreling away money from every job, planning for exactly this kind of expansion. "We can," Preston assured her. "And I can do most of the work myself, maybe hire some help for the heavy lifting. By next spring, we could have a proper house instead of just a cabin." Rebecca leaned against him, content and grateful. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this. After Thomas died, I thought I would just survive day to day until Emma was grown. I never thought I would be this happy again." "Neither did I," Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. "I spent 15 years just drifting, never putting down roots, never letting myself want more than a paycheck and a place to sleep. And then I saw you in that general store and something just clicked into place." "It was the ring," Rebecca said with a small smile. "You could not resist playing the hero." "Maybe," Preston admitted, "but it was more than that. It was the way you held your head up even though you were clearly at the end of your rope. It was the pride in your eyes, the determination. I saw someone who was fighting as hard as I had fought, and I wanted to help. And then I got to know you, and helping turned into caring, and caring turned into love. I still wear it, you know," Rebecca said, holding up her left hand where both rings gleamed in the fading light. "Thomas's ring and yours together. Some people think it is strange, but I do not care." "I think it is perfect," Preston said. "It shows where you have been and where you are going. Both parts of your life matter." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the prairie sounds, the wind in the grass, the distant call of an owl. These were the moments Rebecca treasured most, the quiet times when it was just the two of them, the children asleep, the day's work done. Nothing required except to exist beside each other. The house expansion took most of 1898, with Preston working on it whenever he had time between paying jobs. Several of their neighbors helped, and Preston returned the favor by working on their properties in turn. By the time Patricia turned 1 year old, they had a proper house with 2 bedrooms, a larger main room with a real cook stove, and even a small study where Preston could keep his tools and accounts. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma started attending the school in Guthrie, riding in each day with other children from the area. Peter was a curious, active toddler who followed his father everywhere, and Patricia was a happy baby who seemed to smile at everything. Preston's work was steady. Rebecca's garden and preserves business continued to grow, and slowly they built not just a house but a home filled with love and laughter. In the summer of 1899, Thomas's parents came to visit from Missouri. It was the first time they had met Preston, and Rebecca had been nervous about the encounter, worried they might see her remarriage as a betrayal of their son. But the elderly couple, worn down by their own grief and losses, were kind to Preston and clearly delighted by their grandchildren. "Thomas would have liked you," Mr. Hart told Preston one evening as they sat outside, smoking pipes and watching the sunset. "He would have been glad to know Rebecca found someone good, someone who treats her right and loves our Emma." "I hope so," Preston said. "I never want to replace him in Emma's memory. I try to make sure she remembers her first father, knows that he loved her." "You are a good man, Preston Parker," Mr. Hart said. "My son was lucky in his choice of wife, and Rebecca is lucky in her choice of second husband. You have given her back her life." "She gave me mine," Preston said simply. The visit ended with tears and embraces, promises to write and visit again when possible. Watching Rebecca hug Thomas's mother, seeing the love and forgiveness pass between them, Preston felt a profound sense of gratitude for the complicated, beautiful family they had built from loss and loneliness. As Oklahoma Territory moved toward the new century, the Parker family continued to grow and change. Emma became a bright, confident young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Peter showed an early aptitude for working with animals and declared he would have a ranch even bigger than the Double R someday. Patricia was still young, but she had her mother's determination and her father's easy laugh. In 1901, when Emma was 13, Peter was 6, and Patricia was 4, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. At 31 years old, she was more exhausted by pregnancy than she had been in her 20s, but Preston's joy and support carried her through. Their fourth child, a boy they named Paul, was born in early 1902, completing their family. Preston was 42 years old now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of sun and laughter. Rebecca was graying too, her hands marked by hard work, her face showing the passage of time. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people who had found each other that autumn day in Guthrie, two lonely souls who had dared to hope for more. They had long since paid off the debts from Rebecca's desperate days, had built the farm into something sustainable and profitable. Preston had become a respected figure in the community, known for his fairness and his skill. Rebecca's preserves and vegetables were sought after, and she had trained Emma to help with the business. One Sunday in the spring of 1903, the whole family attended church together as they did every week. As they filed into their usual pew, Preston noticed Mr. Callahan sitting across the aisle. The old shopkeeper caught his eye and gave him a knowing smile, his gaze dropping to Rebecca's left hand where 2 rings still gleamed together. After the service, Mr. Callahan approached them. "Morning, Parker family. Fine day, is it not?" "It is, Mr. Callahan," Preston said, shaking his hand. "How is business? Cannot complain. Actually, I wanted to tell you something, Mr. Parker. Been meaning to for years but never quite found the right moment." The old man paused, looking between Preston and Rebecca. "That day you bought Mrs. Hart's ring back from me. I knew you were someone special. I have seen a lot of folks come through my store over the years, but not many would do what you did for a complete stranger. I am glad to see it worked out the way it did." "So am I," Preston said, pulling Rebecca close to his side. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Rebecca corrected with a smile. "The best was deciding to marry me." That goes without saying, Preston laughed, kissing the top of her head. Mr. Callahan chuckled and moved on, and the Parker family headed home to their farm. Emma and Peter racing ahead while Preston carried Patricia on his shoulders and Rebecca held baby Paul in her arms. The Oklahoma sun was warm on their faces, the grass was green with spring growth, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. That evening, after the children were in bed, Preston and Rebecca sat on the porch that he had first repaired almost 10 years ago. It had been rebuilt and expanded along with the rest of the house, but it was still their favorite place to sit and talk, to reflect on the day and plan for tomorrow. "You ever think about that day I walked into Callahan's store?" Preston asked, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "How different things might have been if I had come in 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later. I think about it sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "How close I came to losing this ring forever, how desperate I was. And then you appeared like something out of a story, this stranger willing to help for no reason except kindness." "I had a reason," Preston said. "I was lonely. I had been lonely for 15 years, even though I did not really let myself acknowledge it. And then I saw you, and something in me recognized something in you. Two people who understood what it meant to fight and lose and keep fighting anyway." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely, who had given her back not just her ring but her hope, her future, her capacity for joy. "I love you, Preston Parker. I love Thomas, and I will always carry that love with me. But what I feel for you is just as real, just as deep. You saved me in more ways than you know." "We saved each other," Preston said, kissing her softly. "That is what love is supposed to do." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched over them since that first meeting, the same Oklahoma sky that had witnessed their courtship and marriage and the building of their family. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of growing things, of promise and possibility. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. Emma, almost a woman now, who had accepted Preston as her father without ever forgetting the man who gave her life. Peter and Patricia and baby Paul, born of the love that had grown between two people who had both known loss and loneliness and had found in each other the courage to try again. The farm that had once been a place of desperation had become a home filled with laughter and love. The cabin with the red door that Rebecca had nearly lost during the panic of 1893 now stood at the center of a thriving household, expanded and improved but still recognizably the same place where she had struggled alone with a young daughter and dwindling hope. And on Rebecca's finger, 2 rings gleamed in the starlight. The gold band that Thomas had given her in 1888, traded for flour in desperation, and returned by a stranger's kindness. And the silver ring Preston had given her in 1894, symbol of new love and new beginnings. Together they told the story of her life, the losses and the gains, the past and the present, the love that had been and the love that was. Preston looked down at those rings and smiled, remembering the young man he had been at 30, drifting and alone, who had walked into a general store in Guthrie and seen a simple gold band in a wooden box. He had bought it on impulse, driven by something he could not name, never imagining that such a small gesture would change his entire life. But that was how love worked sometimes. It started with small things, simple kindnesses, moments of connection between strangers who did not yet know they were meant to find each other. And then it grew, fed by patience and understanding, by shared struggles and mutual support, until it became something strong enough to build a life on, a family on, a future on. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked, seeing the faraway look in his eyes. "How lucky I am," Preston said simply. "How one decision, one moment of impulse led me to everything I have now. You, the children, this home. All of it started because I could not stand the thought of you having to give up something precious just to survive." "And now we have more than survival," Rebecca said. "We have a life, a real life, full and rich and good. Not easy, maybe, but good." "The best things never are easy," Preston agreed, "but they are worth fighting for." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, neither wanting to break the spell of the evening, the peace of being together after the children were asleep and the world had quieted down. These moments were precious, increasingly rare as the children got older and the demands of the farm and Preston's work grew. "I should check on the baby," Rebecca said eventually, though she made no move to get up. "He is fine," Preston said. "Emma would call if he woke up." "Stay with me a bit longer." So Rebecca stayed, her head on Preston's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them watching the stars wheel slowly across the Oklahoma sky. The same stars that had watched over cowboys and Indians and settlers, over loves lost and found, over lives begun and ended on this harsh, beautiful prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind picked up slightly, bringing the smell of rain that might come tomorrow. The house creaked and settled around them, full of sleeping children and the accumulated possessions of a decade of family life. "You think they will remember this?" Rebecca asked quietly. "When they are grown and have families of their own, do you think they will remember how it felt to be safe and loved and home?" "I think so," Preston said. "I hope so. I hope they remember that love is worth fighting for, that family is something you build and protect, that kindness can change lives. I hope they remember that second chances are possible, that loss does not have to be the end of the story." "You are getting philosophical in your old age," Rebecca teased gently. 43 is not that old," Preston protested, but he was smiling. "Though I confess, chasing after Peter and carrying Patricia around is getting harder than it used to be." "We are not young anymore," Rebecca agreed. "But we are happy. That is worth more than youth any day." Preston kissed her again, deep and slow, pouring into it all the love and gratitude he felt for this woman who had let him into her life, into her heart, into her family. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing a little harder, both smiling. "Bed," Rebecca suggested, her eyes sparkling with an invitation that had nothing to do with sleep. "Best idea you have had all day," Preston said, standing and pulling her to her feet. They went inside, checked on the children one last time, and then retreated to their own room, closing the door on the world outside. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges and joys, they would face it together as they had faced everything since that autumn day in 1893, when Preston Parker had bought a gold wedding ring and changed both their lives forever. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Emma graduated from school and, true to her childhood dream, began teaching at the same small schoolhouse she had attended. Peter proved to have a gift for animal husbandry and started raising horses, showing a patience and skill that reminded Preston of himself at that age. Patricia became Rebecca's shadow, learning to cook and sew and manage a household with the same quiet competence her mother showed. And Paul grew into a lively, cheerful boy who loved music and could often be found singing while he did his chores. In 1908, when Emma was 20 years old, she married a young farmer named Daniel Ross who had a homestead adjoining the Parker property. Preston walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the 7-year-old girl who had watched other children play while her mother traded away her last treasure for flour. Now she was a beautiful, confident woman about to start her own family, and Preston felt the pride of a father whose child had grown up strong and good. Rebecca cried through the entire ceremony, clutching Preston's hand when he returned to sit beside her. "I wish Thomas could see her," she whispered. "I think he can," Preston whispered back, "and I think he is proud." Emma's wedding was the first of many celebrations as the children grew and started their own lives, but there were sorrows too. In 1910, Rebecca received word that her sister in Missouri had died, leaving behind 2 young children. Without hesitation, Preston and Rebecca brought the orphaned niece and nephew to live with them, expanding their family once again and giving the children a home when they had none. Preston's hair was fully silver now, and Rebecca's face bore the lines of a life fully lived. But they were still strong, still active, still deeply in love. They worked together running the farm, raised the new children with the same love and care they had given their own, and watched with satisfaction as their older children built successful, happy lives. In 1915, Emma gave birth to Preston and Rebecca's first grandchild, a girl they named Rebecca Rose. Preston held his tiny granddaughter and marveled at the passage of time, at how the desperate widow and lonely cowboy had built something that would last beyond their own lives, that would ripple forward into future generations. "We did good," he told Rebecca that night, showing her the small blanket Emma had asked her mother to make for the baby. "We did," Rebecca agreed, examining her stitching critically. "I just hope Rose has an easier life than we did. I hope all our grandchildren do." "They will," Preston said confidently, "because they will know they are loved, know they come from people who fought for what mattered. That is the best inheritance we can give them." As World War I raged in distant Europe, the Parker farm remained a place of peace and stability. Peter, now 20, was too valuable to the farm to be drafted, and Paul was still too young. They followed the news with concern but gratitude that their family was spared the worst of the conflict. By 1920, Preston was 60 years old and Rebecca was 50. They had been married for 26 years, together for almost 27. The farm had been passed primarily to Peter, who ran it with his young wife Mary, while Preston and Rebecca took on more supervisory roles. Patricia had married and moved to Oklahoma City, where her husband worked for the railroad. Paul was courting a girl from town and talking about becoming a music teacher. And Emma, their firstborn in heart if not in blood, had 3 children now and a 4th on the way. She lived close enough to visit often, and her children adored their grandparents, especially Grandpa Preston, who still carved wooden toys and told stories about his days as a cowboy. One evening, in late summer of 1920, Preston and Rebecca sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The house had been repaired and updated over the years, but this porch remained, rebuilt twice but always in the same place, always their sanctuary. 27 years, Rebecca said, holding up her hand to look at her rings in the fading light. The gold band was worn thin now, the silver one slightly tarnished despite her best efforts to keep it polished. "Since you walked into Mr. Callahan's store and bought this ring." 27 years since the best impulse of my life, Preston agreed. He moved a little slower now, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his eyes were still clear and his love for Rebecca still as strong as ever. "You ever regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Taking on a widow and her child, all the struggles we have had, the hard times." Preston looked at her in genuine surprise. Not for a single moment. Every struggle, every hard time, it was all worth it for this. For you, for our family, for the life we built. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. "So would I," Rebecca said softly. "I never expected to love again after Thomas. Never thought I could. But you taught me that the heart has more capacity than we know, that love does not diminish when it is shared but grows. They sat together as the sun set, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Peter and Mary's children playing, the next generation growing up in the home Preston and Rebecca had fought so hard to build and keep. "What do you think happens when we are gone?" Rebecca asked. "Will they remember us? Will they know the whole story?" "I think Emma will tell them," Preston said. "She remembers everything, that one. She will tell her children and grandchildren about the hard times and how we survived them, about the ring and the flower and the cowboy who could not resist helping." He smiled. "Maybe she will make it sound more romantic than it was." "It was romantic," Rebecca insisted. "You rode up like a hero in a dime novel, returning my ring, fixing my porch, sweeping me off my feet." "I seem to remember you doing some sweeping of your own," Preston said with a laugh. "I was the one who fell first and hardest." They talked until the stars came out, reminiscing about the past, making plans for the future, simply enjoying being together. When they finally went inside, they checked on the grandchildren who were spending the night, then retired to their room. Preston helped Rebecca undress, his movements slow and careful, both of them bearing the aches and pains of age but still finding joy in simple intimacy. They lay together in the darkness, Preston's arm around Rebecca, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Rebecca whispered. "For the ring, for the porch, for everything you have given me. For being the man who saw me at my lowest and still thought I was worth saving." "I love you," Preston replied. "For letting me save you, for saving me in return, for building this beautiful life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Hart Parker." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who had found love in unexpected places and built it into something lasting and true. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, but also joys and triumphs. Preston and Rebecca grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, welcomed new family members, and said goodbye to old friends. Mr. Callahan passed in 1922, and at his funeral, Preston told the story of the ring to Mr. Callahan's children, wanting them to know what their father's kindness had meant. In 1925, Preston fell ill with pneumonia. For a week, Rebecca nursed him with the same determination she had shown in all their struggles, refusing to let him go without a fight. And Preston, stubborn and tough even at 65, pulled through, though it left him weaker than before. "You are not allowed to leave me yet," Rebecca told him when he was finally recovering. "We have more years together, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch." "Yes, madam," Preston said with a tired smile. "I will do my best to stick around." He kept that promise for another 12 years. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1934, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Emma was 46 years old with children of her own who had children. Peter ran a successful ranch that employed half a dozen men. Patricia had become a civic leader in Oklahoma City, and Paul had indeed become a music teacher, beloved by his students and respected throughout the territory turned state. At the anniversary celebration, Emma gave a speech about her parents, telling the gathered family about the hard times after her first father died, about the ring traded for flour, about the cowboy who bought it back and returned it to her mother's finger. "They taught us that love is action, not just words," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "That kindness can change lives, that second chances are real, that family is worth fighting for. Everything I am, everything we all are, comes from the foundation they built." Preston held Rebecca's hand throughout the speech, both of them crying, both overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. The ring on Rebecca's finger was worn paper thin now, the gold barely visible, but it still gleamed beside the silver band Preston had given her, both symbols of a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something that would echo through generations. Preston Parker passed away peacefully in his sleep in June of 1937 at the age of 77. Rebecca woke to find him beside her, a slight smile on his face, his hand still clasping hers. She did not cry out or panic. She simply held his hand and whispered goodbye, thanking him for 43 years of love and partnership, for being the man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Oklahoma. Preston had touched many lives through his kindness and integrity, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Rebecca stood straight and strong throughout, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, the family Preston had helped her build now supporting her in return. After the funeral, Emma found her mother standing alone in the church cemetery, looking down at the fresh grave beside the older one marked Thomas Hart, 1862–1893, beloved husband and father. "It seems fitting somehow," Rebecca said when Emma joined her. "My two husbands side by side. The man I loved first and the man I loved last, both part of who I am." "Papa Preston would have liked that," Emma said. She still called him Papa Preston to distinguish him from her birth father, though Preston had been the only father she really remembered. "He never minded sharing you with Papa Thomas's memory. He understood," Rebecca said. "Love is not a competition. It is a gift, freely given and freely received. Preston taught me that." Rebecca lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and active well into her 70s. She helped raise great-grandchildren, taught her granddaughters to sew and preserve food, passed on the stories of the hard times and how they had survived them. On her finger, she wore both rings until the end. The gold band had finally worn through in 1940, too thin to maintain its shape, but Emma had it carefully preserved in a small glass case. The silver band lasted longer, sturdy and strong like the man who had given it. Rebecca Hart Parker passed away in her sleep in April of 1945, at the age of 75. She was buried between Thomas and Preston, 3 lives intertwined by love and loss and the courage to keep living. At her funeral, Emma told the story one more time, about the ring and the flower and the cowboy, about love that endured beyond death, about a family built on the foundation of kindness. The rings, both of them, were passed down to Emma, who gave the gold band to her eldest daughter Rebecca Rose and the silver band to her eldest son Thomas Preston. The story was told and retold through the generations, becoming family legend, a reminder of where they came from and what mattered most. The farm itself remained in the family for decades, passed from Peter to his son to his grandson. The house was eventually torn down and rebuilt, but the old porch, the one Preston had first repaired in 1893, was preserved and incorporated into the new structure, a physical reminder of where it all began. And in Oklahoma, on warm autumn evenings when the sky turns orange and pink and the prairie wind whispers through the grass, some say you can still see them. A cowboy and a woman with a little girl, sitting on a porch, watching the sunset, their love a light that time cannot dim. Whether it is true or just a story does not really matter. What matters is that they existed, that they loved, that they built something lasting from desperation and kindness and hope. The ring that was traded for flour and bought back by a stranger became a symbol of everything that was possible when people chose love over fear, generosity over selfishness, hope over despair. It became a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest impacts, that kindness is never wasted, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places. Preston and Rebecca's story became the foundation of a family that spread across Oklahoma and beyond, their descendants carrying forward the lessons they had taught. Work hard, love deeply, help others when you can, never give up, no matter how dark things seem. These were the values Preston and Rebecca had lived by, and they echoed through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, shaping lives they would never see but had profoundly influenced. The tale of the woman who traded her wedding ring for flour, and the cowboy who bought it back and returned it to her finger, became a touchstone for the family, told at weddings and funerals, at family reunions and quiet bedtime moments. It was a story about survival and kindness, about loss and love, about two people who found each other when they both needed saving and built a life that would resonate through generations. And somewhere in the vast Oklahoma sky, under the same stars that had watched over them, Preston and Rebecca's love endured, a testament to the power of compassion, the possibility of second chances, and the enduring truth that love, real love, never truly dies. It transforms, it evolves, it spreads outward like ripples in a pond, touching lives far beyond its origin. The ring that started it all, worn thin by years of wear, carefully preserved in its glass case, remained a family treasure, a reminder of desperation and hope, of an act of kindness that changed everything. And every time someone in the family faced hard times, faced loss, faced moments of despair, they would remember the story. Remember that Rebecca survived. Remember that Preston helped. Remember that love found a way even when it seemed impossible. That is how legends are born, not from grand gestures or epic battles, but from small moments of humanity, from choices to be kind when cruelty would be easier, from the courage to love again after loss. Preston and Rebecca's story was one such legend, grown from a simple gold ring, a sack of flour, and a cowboy who could not resist helping someone in need. And in the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To live with kindness, to love deeply, to leave the world a little better than we found it, and to be remembered not for what we accumulated, but for how we loved. Preston and Rebecca Parker did all of that and more, and their legacy lived on, generation after generation. A light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love endures, hope survives, and second chances are always possible.